Hello. This week I ran into something that is it's going to be kind of deep and a bit involved. So I was started reading Detective Conan, and then it occurred to me that Conan is still running, and he's still trapped in an elementary school child's body, which raised all kinds of questions. And in my search to find answers, because I didn't want to just hop on here and trash the fact that he doesn't age, I found the reference to something called a floating timeline, which by definition is kind of traced back to the origins of like folk heroes and mythical figures from our past, and that is from a time period where we didn't have the internet, and like everyone kind of had a shared set of characters that they used for story purposes, in part because it was easier for you to sell somebody in a new town on the idea of sitting down to listen to a story about, say, Robin Hood or Thor or Zeus or who else can I think of? I'm sure Gilgamesh back in the day was also part of that, functioned in that same way, where you'd show up in a town if you were a bard or some other kind of storytelling person, an entertainer. You would just have your own version of a story about a well-known character, and that people would just belly up and listen and be more than happy to, add that to a list of things that possibly could have happened in the life of that legendary and, inhuman human, if you will. Now, in current day and age, apparently, the excuse is basically monetary constraints or monetary needs. The customers want it, so let's give it to them. So who cares if Tony Stark, never ages in the 30-something years that he exists? Because there's an example on the Wikipedia that I was checking that was talking about, how the origin story of how Tony gets his suit of armor is sort of the same, but like the conflict that's involved, which war you're dealing with is changed, and who those main like antagonists are. But the overarching idea is the same, because they just change this. Every couple years they'll change it. In this case, for Conan, I don't think they ever really change that, because they're not like resetting every couple years like his origin story. They just keep going with it. And with Conan, the floating story idea, because it's a single author, and it's not like the people's, thing. Where, like, say with Dojin, with like fan-made art things related to different comics, that's a product of the people, and they're just using that character as, for whatever, right? Similar to if you were, like I said before, if you're a traveling minstrel or something, and you go to a new town, you need to get people to read or listen, I should say. You should, in that case, you're listening to it. That's how you'd sell it. You'd get people to pay attention. They're like, oh, a new Robin Hood story, okay. But also in that age of media consumption, the number of Robin Hood stories you were going to hear in your lifetime from a professional, storyteller was probably a low enough number that you weren't going to have to wonder about whether or not Robin Hood ever, got too old for that profession, Whereas in this case, we are currently up to 104 for the series, and he's still an elementary school student, and as far as I can tell, he's still in the same grade. And even if every story took a single day, for him to solve. Like, the average one of these is like 5 stories or something. The original, there's 9. Like, there's 9 chapters in this particular volume. So between, and I've seen other manga that only have like 5, depending on, what's going on. But point being, if we went with that 9 number, that's like 900 days. And I'm pretty sure he's living on normal Earth that has, a little under 400, 365 days. So we're going for like 2.5 years ish. If it was a 1 day, a story, or one day per chapter, we'll say. Yeah, we're going on 2.5 years worth of content at least. Yeah, and because it's a mystery series and people die and they don't come back, they don't show up and then 2 weeks later with no reason to it, just to be reused in the stories. There's also like that added aspect of it, of thinking that okay, there's finality in some of this. So yeah, for me it's a little bit, it's a question that I need an answer for, and it's going to bother me on. I've watched some of the movies, I think, back a while ago, and I used to watch Case Closed on Toonami back in the day. So yeah, I've had enough experience with this to appreciate it. The mysteries are good. I enjoy the content that's within each episode, but it's gotten long enough now that there's this underlying dreadful concern I have about things within the universe. Like, I'm now to a point where I am concerned that either the original, our main character, Jimmy Kudo, I think, for the English version, and I think Shinichi maybe is the name of the main character, the first name for our Japanese side of the storyline. I am concerned that he's either in a coma or he died, and he's either in heaven or purgatory or something, being messed with. I mean, if he's in heaven, maybe that's his idea of the perfect existence. Is his dream was to become Sherlock Holmes, or someone like Sherlock Holmes. So, if he was trapped in an eternity of solving mysteries, and living that fantasy of being the hero that's like Sherlock Holmes, then cool, good for him. But yeah, the other fact is that he's trying to take down this black organization, and it's still around after 20 years worth of writing, something like that. Like, this volume 1 here was originally published in 1994, so we're looking at 30 years of work in the real world, and minimally 2.5 years of this Groundhog's Day purgatory something or other, where time doesn't pass but those who die can escape the loop, which I guess if you wanted to go into in a philosophical sense, like maybe he's it's some kind of secret Buddhist parable of the only way for you escape the cycle through some form of finality there. And again, if we circle back to that floating timeline literary mechanic, there are certain types of media that I personally think it's fine. Like, it doesn't bother me in any way. Mainly for one of them being the audience and like the purpose of the media itself. So, example being Doraemon. Okay, and we're back. So with Doraemon, there's time travel. Doraemon goes back in time to try and fix a certain character, Nobita, who is this stereotypical, easy way out, spoiled little trash child. And the whole point is, fix him so he becomes like a good adult who is worthy of, marrying, the person they're supposed to marry and all this stuff, whatever. But every time Doraemon fails, you can, give the excuse of time travel, go back to a different timeline, whatever, reset, try again. And all the characters can stay the same, basically, because one's a robot, and the other is, a child at a certain age that, that's like the key point, apparently, that needs to get started from in order to fix the future. And it's also, on a different element, a moral education, like kind of device that is pretty much blatantly there for the education of children. And since we all know that it's meant very specifically for this purpose, again, I don't have those questions that are rattling around in my brain. During this little intermission that I had to take, I was talking with someone else about this series, and they made the argument that, Conan is still shown during the children's time for anime in Japan, which, then heavily leans onto the whole, well, if it's meant for children, then we don't have to care that much about time progression, because the audience that we're writing for is only ever supposed to be a certain age group. And anyone who gets out of that age group is supposed to grow out of the content and therefore not consume it anymore. At which point, critical examination of anything like time progression is no longer relevant. Would be, kind of the argument there, right? Because if your audience base is perpetually being refreshed, and that audience base is always going to be a certain age group, and they're always going to be, new to the series, then you don't have to worry about it, right? Unfortunately, this series is really well written, to the point where, adults can enjoy this series for the plot that is involved. Like, the different mysteries that they have are pretty well written, and most of the time they're not written in a way that's coddling you to the point where, you as an adult are going to feel insulted by the fact you're being spoon-fed the answer. So, now that we've gotten into that trouble of, now there's a bunch of adults that still care about this series, or are introduced to the series as adults and start asking questions that apparently they shouldn't be questioning because, it's just for kids. Yeah. Well, yeah. My concern is, quite literally, that I think the universe is, to me, definitely not just something I can write off like with Doraemon or some other series. It is one that will continue to give me concerns about whether or not the main character is actually, for just along for the ride for basically a coma-induced, like, fantasy land. Or even if the main character has been, somehow maybe maybe he died already, like I mentioned before, and he's now in purgatory or someplace, living in a fantasy, in a dream state in which, time, the passage of time it's not required to be accounted for. Yeah, those are questions and concerns I'm always going to have, regardless of the fact that it's using floating timeline, which, again, for me, is something that should be primarily reserved for public domain, we'll call them, IPs. Because anything that's not that and is using it, it doesn't feel very good to me. Because, like I said, the origin of floating timeline is something that involved folk heroes and characters that were made by the people, basically, and used by the people. And yeah, there you have it. It's a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, but yeah, my deep concerns about Conan. Though I do recommend reading it because it's really good. Yeah, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you can. I'd appreciate that, and we'll see you next week, I hope. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to come to the store that's in Waikiki. We're open from Tuesdays to Sundays, 10 to 5. If you can't make it into the store, don't forget to check out our website where we have everyday updates on what's expected to come in and what we actually have in stock. You can also order online.